Stranger Stories.
Never miss another strange story. Subscribe and hit the bell. Sit back and get comfortable. I have a few stories to share with you. There are a lot of stories and urban legends about Chuck E. Cheese animatronics, such as they look at cameras and they move around at night. Well, I'm here to tell you it's all horseshit. Animatronics are shut off after hours and bolted to the floor at all times. However, there is one slight exception to this. I'm the assistant manager at a local Chuck E. Cheese that has been around since it was a Snowbiz Pizza back when I was a kid. Until I grew out of the Chuck E. Cheese Go rage, I was always aspired to work there, to get close to the animatronics, to see what made them tick. I always knew kids who were frightened to death by them, but they were always my favorite things since I first saw them. Then I forgot about it. I never went back to that place since my friend's birthday party, when he and I were about 6, until a few months ago. At first, I didn't know what Chuck E. Cheese was when I saw the hiring sign, but the address looked familiar. I looked it up, and considering my options in this small town I lived in, I convinced myself to go grab the job. To make long story short, I got the job. I started working as a janitor, but someone replaced me. Instead of firing me though, they bumped me into assistant manager and hired another janitor. Supposedly, the business had been scrapping along without one because they couldn't afford to hire one, even though it was demanded by the company that they had an assistant manager. Anyways, I'm getting a little off track. In the restaurant, there's a back room where the animatronics were stored before they were repurposed as new Chuck E. Cheese type animatronics. Mainly they took the end skeletons and the guts from the old ones and stuffed them in the new costumes. However, there was an extra animatronics left over from Snowbiz that didn't fit with the new lineup of animatronics. It was a clown with the rainbow hair. It didn't actually have any legs, it was just stuck in a painting wooden booth. I remember it from Snowbiz when he used to greet customers. Back to me. I was called for a meeting with all the other employees by the manager to help brainstorm on ways to make more money. After all, 2 extra employees can't pay for themselves. One person suggested we had tunnels for the kids to play in, but it would cramp up the already tiny building too much. Another suggested extra arcade machines, but it don't gross enough to be worthwhile unless there was more business, and again, the building was bigger. After sitting, melting in our chairs in the stuffy, poorly ventilated meeting room for about 15 minutes, which felt more like half an hour, the manager suddenly sat up with what appeared to be an idea. "I've got it," he said. "We should use the creepy in the back. That's what we call the old clown animatronic in the back. I mean, he's really disturbing. For educational purposes. Think about it. We strip the costume off to just the end skeleton and add signs and pamphlets about how it works. The parents would go apeshit for that kind of thing, no?" Everyone, including myself, nodded in agreement and murmured something like "yeah" or "okay," desperate to escape this hellhole of a meeting room. Fast forward a week later, and we have it all set up. Right in the corner to the left of the entrance, the upper half of the end skeleton sitting in a wooden box, which has been repainted with something like "Learn How We Work," with the Chuck E. Cheese mascot painted below it. Several colorful signs have been placed around it and inside the animatronic, which describes its parts and what they do in a simple, kid-friendly term. As we had hoped, parents went nuts for the attraction, holding their children's shoulders tight who just wanted to play arcade games and devour our wretched pizza. I know you heard about our pizzas. Guiding them over to the booth, oohing and eyeing trying to coax their children into being interested in the end skeleton. There were a few straggler kids who went up to the booth by themselves, occasionally a group, but mostly to kick it and stick down to the clear plastic shell we had placed over the stripped animatronic. It was truly a sight to behold. Wires, frame, and tubes exposed. Eyeballs with the small white irises staring at the animatronic stage, motionless. Unlike most cliché stories about these sort of events, I didn't get a bad feeling about the animatronic skeleton, nor did it stare at me. It just looked off into space, motionless. The day finished, the informational booth went well. As I mentioned, the thing was a hit. However, I'm not here to endlessly describe how business was, or glorify the animatronic skeleton. That evening, everyone left, the manager and I being last. Walking out, we blabbed about our social lives, shooting the bull, and he jammed his keys in, locking the doors. As we bid each other farewell for the weekend, I caught a glimpse inside the dark building through the window, and I swear I saw an animatronic skeleton twitch for a moment. Shunning the thought of a disabled animatronic moving when it was unplugged, I got in my car and went home. The weekend passed, which consisted of me visiting my mother and logging more hours into games on my PC. Returning to work on Monday, a few minutes past on time. I walked in and looked around. Everything was where it should be. Grimy arcade machines in place, greasy quarter dispensers still somewhat functional. It was all good. Looking over the corner where the end skeleton booth was, I noticed something different about it. The animatronic was looking in a different direction, straight down rather than at the stage. I quickly realized that the manager's nephew had most likely been messing with it. But then I remembered it was bolted down, both the shell to the booth and the booth to the floor. The manager walked out and greeted me. Being the coolest manager ever, he didn't mention how I was 10 minutes late. That was pretty nice of him. The thing he did mention, however, was that the animatronic skeleton head was in a different direction. His theory was that the neck was getting too weak and worn out to support the head, which seemed pretty plausible. I provided him with a question of what would happen if we plugged it in, and he said that it would be a waste of power. So I just let it go and forgot about it. The day went normally. I watched over the employees and even had a slice of our terrible pizza. The same one we spoke of before, the same one you've been hearing all over the news lately. The next day went fine, and the next. However, about a week or two later, give or take a few days, strange things revolving the animatronic skeleton were happening. I was reviewing a night security footage as usual, and even in the low frame rate used to save storage space, I saw the animatronic blink, slow and deliberately. A few days later, reviewing the overnight footage yet again, I noticed the animatronic slowly raised their head back to face the stage, but then moved back into its prior position. The following days after these strange incidents led to an investigation by my manager, my fellow employees, and I. We had singled out almost everyone except the janitor, the manager, and I. Once again, sitting in the stuffy meeting room, everyone talked amongst themselves until the manager cleared his throat. Silence befell on the room as everyone stared at the manager or down at their feet. He eventually spoke up. After much thought, we have come to the conclusion that someone is playing an elaborate prank. This is strictly against policy, and as such, I cannot allow whoever is behind it to remain employed. As much as I don't want to do this, I'm afraid we'll have to let you go. He turned to one of the janitors, who was, as I was informed, working overtime when the incident has occurred. Jeremy. We'll call him Jeremy for this story. He turned to the janitor, who was sweating profusely. Then again, we were all sweating profusely, but that's not the point. He became flustered, swallowing frantically, trying to reason with the manager. "I'm sorry, Jeremy. but with all evidence pointing at you, I cannot let this continue. The janitor bared his teeth in anger, ripping at his shirt, and stormed out. Everyone watched in shock as he pushed out the cardboard cutouts and kicked in the arcade machine on his way out. Speechless, the manager waved us out, and we continued our duties. The day soon ended as usual, and we went home. The next day came, and I surveyed the security tapes, finding nothing unusual. At this point, I was convinced it was Jeremy finding some way to mess up with the animatronics. It seemed that, at a certain point, my life had become almost nothing more than checking security tapes, hoping, yet also hoping against, for the animatronic skeleton to move, to do something. But yet, for over 2 weeks, nothing happened. Then, of course, something did. Otherwise, what would this whole story be about, right? It happened Monday night. Police tapes covered the door and a broken window. My jaw dropped as police stood outside the building, shooting the bull and writing things, not allowing me to enter. A few hours later, I got in and reviewed the security footage. The first few minutes were fine, but then I noticed in the corner out of the frame something appeared on the floor. I quickly realized that it was glass, and a few moments later I witnessed a man in a black hoodie crawl through the window holding a drill. Even though he obviously meant to conceal his identity, it was very evident that the person who broke in was Jeremy, the employee who had been fired. I could tell by his build and the way he walked, holding what appeared to be an impact driver. He unbolted the animatronic booth from the floor and lifted it above his head. At this point, I was just as much as impressed as I was shocked. Perhaps it was adrenaline, I have no idea how he did that. That thing weighed at least 150 to 200 pounds. And considering his build, which was tall and skinny, this is no small feat. He staggered over to the main animatronic stage and smashed the booth into it. The chef animatronic had received serious damage to its left foot, which was near where he smashed the booth into. The animatronic aside the booth had shockingly survived without a scratch. The booth, however, was completely ruined. Shortly thereafter, the cops caught him, and not surprisingly, it was Jeremy. We closed for a few days for repairs, made a new booth, and were back on track. The following few weeks went like they were supposed to. One employee quit and another was hired. Things were going well, but of course, like before, things started derailing again. It started with the animatronic now changing entire positions. The camera feed became increasingly jumpy and shoddy, which, for reasons unknown, made my heart sink. I should have quit right there, just left. Others did. Most did, in fact. The manager did everything he could to conceal this happening from the public. And as far as this was concerned, he was doing a pretty good job. We were soon required to film ourselves leaving the building and arriving home. The cameras were replaced with newer, higher quality ones, and the animatronics now had a camera inside its booth. It appeared that the manager was becoming increasingly paranoid, warning us not to tell anyone, and became a recluse in his office, leaving only upon closing time. Supposedly, he had even received a letter from the owner about this issue. It wasn't until I saw yesterday's security footage from the inside of the animatronic booth that I began to sympathize with my manager. It started fine with nothing out of the ordinary, but it quickly takes a turn for the worst. The feed became choppy and staticky, but through this you can see the animatronic jitter and raise its head, looking around. You can hear the whine of the motors as it proceeds to crawl through an opening in the backside of the booth, and then the feed goes black. After a few minutes of nothingness, the feed comes back. I was practically flung out of my chair from shock by what my eyes beheld. The animatronic, dressed in its creepy clown outfits, parts torn out and faded. I beckoned the other employees to come over and watch this, and shared my reaction. We confronted our manager, each with our own questions, raining down all at him at once. He just sat in his chair, frowning, face pale as a sheet of paper. Doing his best to answer our questions, he eventually just turned around in his chair and made a whining noise that we assumed to be crying. We left and continued our jobs. Later that day, he stumbled out of his office, handing all of his employees pink slips and giving them hugs. When he came to me, I told him that whenever he needed help, I'd be there. He thanked me, but instead of proceeding to hand me a slip, he just went back to his office. Later that night, as I was leaving, one of the employees shoved me against the wall of the building and was about to beat me up for losing his job. His reasoning was that, except for the manager, I had been the only one in the back room where the animatronics costumes were stowed. Just as he landed a punch, the manager stormed out, walking towards the disgruntled former employee, who quickly became spooked and ran off. We parted ways without a word. At this point, I felt genuinely horrific. These insane events were ripping my kind-hearted manager as well as my co-workers to shreds, so I decided to do the right thing, ask him if I could take it off his hands. He, of course, agreed, and I brought it home with me for the night. This morning, I brought it to a couple of paranormal investigator geeks who happened to be my friends from high school. They spewed a bunch of mumbo-jumbo and basically told me it wasn't haunted, but it did have some funky wiring issues. I took it to an electrician, and when he looked at it, he stared at me with a wide-eyed expression. "What?" I replied, weirded out by his gaze. I can't," he mumbled. "Come here," he said. He beckoned me to come to his side, so I said, "What is it?" He pointed at an admittedly strange-looking circuit, with wires half exposed and chewed. "Look at this," he said. "Do you see it?" I said no, and he explained. "You see this wire right here, the red one?" He pointed to a chewed red wire. "It's creating what's known as infinite circuit." I won't go into too much detail, but he basically told me that the chewed up red wire was touching a metal frame, and as I mentioned, created an infinite circuit. It was somehow using the most minuscule amount of electricity to build up a charge and power the module that, in turn, powered the animatronic. Hence why it took so long between complex actions, which meant that the thing was still technically with power. Part of me definitely believes him. He's an electrician after all. However, a different part of me believes something else may have happened. I just can't explain why the eyes opened and looked directly at the camera. Or even more, how the hell did it crawl across the room and outside of his booth? It just made me feel something I never felt before that I just simply cannot explain. I thanked him and brought it home again, throwing it into a fire pit in my backyard. I had to make sure that thing is gone from mine and everyone else's lives. I still can't explain what happened there. I'd gladly take the electrician's explanation over my explanation, but I guess I will never really know for sure what happened on these nights.